Breaking, and this is not a drill. The United States Supreme Court just declared Trump's tariffs on Canada illegal, and now Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney has just signed a historic strategic alliance with Japan worth billions in energy, defense, and trade. The $175 billion question is, has Canada just made the United States completely irrelevant? And what comes next will permanently redraw the map of North American power. Before we dive into this explosive breakdown, and I mean explosive, this story has 5 different layers all detonating at once. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell icon, because this story is moving fast and you're going to want the follow-up the moment it drops. All right, let's get into it. Let's set the stage. Because to understand how dramatic this moment is, you need to understand how we got here. It started back in March of 2025, 1 year ago, when President Donald Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on Canada under something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. 25% tariffs across the board, energy at 10%, a stunning act of economic aggression against America's closest ally and largest trading partner. Canada hit back hard. On March 4, 2025, Ottawa slapped 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods, American beer, American wine, American steel, and that was just phase 1. In 2025, Canadian exports to the U.S. totaled $556 billion, already down 6% from $590 billion the year before. The economic damage was real on both sides of the border. But here's what they're not telling you in the mainstream headlines. While the world was watching the tariff fight, Canada was playing an entirely different game, a bigger game, a longer game. And this week, that game just hit its most explosive moment yet. Smash that like button if you're already seeing why this story is bigger than the headlines. Stay with me because the most jaw-dropping details are coming up in the next 4 minutes, and they will genuinely change how you see this entire trade war. Let's talk about the trigger, because there wasn't just one, there were 3. And they all hit within weeks of each other. Trigger number 1, the Supreme Court nukes Trump's legal justification. On February 20, 2026, the United States Supreme Court handed down a ruling that the entire Trump trade strategy was built on a foundation that just doesn't exist. The court found that Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose sweeping country-specific tariffs, the very tariffs crushing Canada, was, quote, unlawful, not questionable, not debatable, unlawful. Lower courts had already been signaling this, but when the Supreme Court, Trump's own Supreme Court, with 3 Trump-appointed justices, says your tariffs are illegal, that's not spin, that's a constitutional earthquake. The financial implications. According to legal analysts, companies are now entitled to roughly $175 billion in tariff refunds. The U.S. Customs Agency is already scrambling. They're building a system within 45 days to process those refunds. Let that number sink in: $175 billion. But here's where it gets even more serious, because even as the refund chaos was unfolding, Canada wasn't sitting around waiting. Trigger number 2, Carney's 10-day Indo-Pacific mission. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, just completed a 10-day tour across India, Australia, and Japan. Now, this wasn't a diplomatic photo opportunity. This was a strategic masterstroke. According to sources at CBC, CTV, and Reuters, all reporting within the last 48 hours, Carney signed multiple major agreements on this trip, including a comprehensive strategic partnership with Japan on March 6, 2026. That's literally yesterday, covering defense, energy, trade, and technology, and a CTV political commentator summed it up best. Quote, new trade deals give Canada leverage against the might of the United States. Canada is building an escape route. Trigger number 3, USMCA negotiations resume with Canada holding new cards. On the same day, Carney was signing deals in Tokyo. Canada's trade minister was in Washington, D.C., meeting with U.S. trade officials on the review of USMCA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And Canada called those discussions, quote, constructive. That word constructive is diplomatic language, but read between the lines. Canada walked into that room in Washington with leverage it didn't have 12 months ago, the Supreme Court ruling in their favor, new allies in the Indo-Pacific, and a domestic electorate that has completely turned against American economic dependency. That's 3 triggers, all converging in the same 72-hour window. This is not a coincidence. This is a strategy. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Canada has outmaneuvered the Trump administration? Or is this all posturing and the U.S. still holds all the real cards? I read every single comment and I genuinely want to know what you think. Now let's get into the evidence. Let's break down the Supreme Court ruling first, because this is the legal bedrock of everything else. Trump's tariff strategy relied almost entirely on IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This law gives the president emergency powers to regulate international commerce during a national emergency. Trump declared that immigration and drug trafficking from Canada and Mexico constituted such an emergency on that basis. He imposed 25% tariffs across all Canadian goods. Here's why this matters. IEEPA was never designed for this. Constitutional law scholars had been warning for months that using it for broad-based, country-specific tariffs stretched the law far beyond its intended scope, and the Supreme Court agreed. The ruling specifically says that the administration's use of IEEPA, quote, falls short of the authority required to impose these tariffs. According to TD Economics analysts, the ruling affects tariffs that had generated hundreds of billions in revenue, with a $175 billion refund liability now potentially facing the federal government. And here's the kicker on this first point. Lawyers are now saying Trump's newer tariffs, the ones imposed after the initial legal challenges, might be illegal too, for the same reasons. The Globe and Mail reported on February 24, 2026, that attorneys are already filing new challenges. So the legal ground beneath the Trump tariff empire? It's not just cracking. It has already collapsed in a court of law. For Canada, this means every dollar of tariff paid under IEEPA is now potentially recoverable. For the Trump administration, it means their primary trade weapon has been legally confiscated by the highest court in the land. Now, here's where it gets even more serious, because the Supreme Court ruling only tells half the story. While that legal battle was playing out, Prime Minister Mark Carney was executing a foreign policy move that's being dramatically underreported. His 10-day Indo-Pacific trip India, Australia, Japan wasn't just about trade in the abstract. It was specifically about reducing Canada's vulnerability to American economic coercion. The Japan deal, signed March 6, 2026, establishes a comprehensive strategic partnership. What does that mean in practice? It covers defense cooperation, including joint Coast Guard exercises and international emergency response, energy agreements, as Japan desperately needs stable LNG supply and Canada has the world's third-largest natural gas reserves, technology collaboration, specifically in AI and advanced manufacturing, and trade diversification, with Canada explicitly looking to redirect supply chains. The New York Times, reporting from Tokyo on March 6, said, and I'm quoting directly, defense without U.S. help is now a live topic for Canada, Japan, and Australia. Read that again. The world's 10th largest economy, one of America's most loyal allies for 150 years, is now actively planning defense cooperation that explicitly sidelines the United States. According to the Brookings Institution's USMCA Forward 2026 analysis, Canada and Mexico are offering important concessions to the Trump administration to reduce U.S. tariff levels. But, and this is crucial, those concessions are now being offered from a position of strength, not desperation. Canada went to Japan not to flee the United States. Canada went to Japan to change its negotiating position with the United States. That is a strategic masterstroke. If Canada successfully diversifies even 15% of its U.S.-bound trade toward Asian markets, it fundamentally changes the economic calculus. The U.S. currently absorbs over $550 billion in Canadian exports annually. Any meaningful reduction in that dependency dramatically weakens Washington's leverage. And here's the absolute kicker, the thing that ties everything together and explains why this moment is being called the final card. On March 6, 2026, the same day Carney was in Tokyo signing the Japan deal, Canada's trade minister was sitting across the table from American trade officials in Washington with USMCA on the agenda. For those who don't know, USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, is up for its mandatory joint review in 2026. This is the moment when the terms of North American trade get renegotiated. The agreement can be extended, modified, or terminated. This is the highest stakes trade negotiation happening anywhere in the world right now. According to Reuters, reporting directly from those March 6 meetings, Canada called the discussions constructive. That same Reuters report confirmed that U.S. and Mexican negotiators will hold bilateral discussions starting the week of March 16th. Now here's what you need to understand about the word constructive. 12 months ago, Canada was on its heels. The tariffs were hurting. The political pressure was immense. Constructive then meant, please stop hitting us. Constructive now means something completely different. Canada has a Supreme Court ruling declaring us tariffs illegal, new strategic alliances in Asia worth billions, a domestic political consensus that the U.S. relationship needs to be fundamentally restructured, and a new prime minister with a mandate to never again be this dependent on one trading partner, the dollar amount at stake. The entire framework governing over $1 trillion in annual North American trade. That's $1,000 billion every year. This isn't a card game. This is economic history being written in real time. If you haven't subscribed yet, pause this video and do it right now. Seriously, this is the kind of deep dive political analysis that YouTube buries in the algorithm if it doesn't get early engagement. I need your support to keep producing content at this level. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's keep going because the reactions to all of this are absolutely wild. Let's talk about how different players are reacting because the reactions tell you as much as the events themselves. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been remarkably disciplined in his messaging. He's not gloating. He's not tweeting victory laps. He signed the Japan deal and called it a model for modern partnerships. He described Canada's new diversification strategy as building resilience, which is politicians speak for we are never being this vulnerable. Again, Carney specifically told reporters in Tokyo that Canada is, quote, bullish on Indo-Pacific partnerships. Multiple Canadian exporters are now reportedly following his lead, looking to redirect supply chains toward Asia, according to BNN Bloomberg's March 6th reporting. His trade minister, after the Washington meeting, used the precise word constructive no more, no less in diplomatic terms. That's a message that says, we are being reasonable, the ball is in your court, and we have other options. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who has been one of the loudest voices on the trade war front, said after the Washington meetings that Canada has, quote, learned the rules of the game. That is a remarkably candid statement. It suggests that Canada's political class now understands the Trump negotiating playbook and has decided to play it right back. Now here's where the reactions get interesting and, frankly, somewhat chaotic. The Trump administration has not issued any unified public response to the Supreme Court ruling that directly challenged their tariff authority. Individual advisors have been giving conflicting messages, some suggesting new tariff mechanisms that avoid IEEPA, others indicating a willingness to negotiate on USMCA. Trump himself has made no major public statements specifically addressing the Supreme Court's IEEPA ruling as it pertains to Canada as of this recording. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency is quietly preparing a refund processing system. A 45-day timeline was announced, but the political messaging around $175 billion in potential refunds is, shall we say, conspicuously absent from White House briefings. Robert Glasgow, an international trade lawyer, told CTV News that companies, quote, may have to jump through lots of hoops to receive a tariff refund and that it's hard to predict when those refunds will actually arrive. Other legal voices, specifically lawyers quoted in the Globe and Mail on February 24th, are warning that Trump's newer tariff executive orders may face the same constitutional fate. They're already filing new challenges. The story is being covered very differently depending on which side of the border you're on. Canadian media. CBC, CTV, Globe and Mail, National Post are treating this as a historic turning point. American mainstream media has covered the Supreme Court ruling but has largely underplayed the Canada-Japan strategic partnership angle. This gap in coverage is itself significant. The American public is largely unaware of how dramatically Canada's global strategy has shifted in the past 12 months. That's going to matter when USMCA negotiations become front-page news, and the international press Reuters, New York Times, Xinhua are all framing this as a story about American credibility. When the Supreme Court strikes down a president's signature economic policy and a major ally responds by building Asian alliances, that's not just trade news, that's a story about American power in the world. Let's zoom out because context is everything here, and this situation has historical echoes that are genuinely chilling. Think back to 1971 when President Nixon unilaterally ended the Bretton Woods gold standard and slapped a 10% surcharge on all imports without congressional approval. America's allies were furious. France called it an act of economic aggression, but within a few years, the dollar remained the world's reserve currency and the U.S. came out ahead. Trump's advisors almost certainly have that precedent in mind. The logic goes, America always wins these fights because the U.S. market is irreplaceable. But here's why 2026 is fundamentally different from 1971. In 1971, there was no alternative reserve currency. There was no Indo-Pacific regional trade framework that could absorb Canadian exports. There was no Supreme Court precedent striking down executive trade authority. Think back to 2018 and 2019, the first US-China trade war under Trump's first term. China retaliated with agricultural tariffs that devastated American soybean farmers in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. The Farm Belt, politically crucial Trump territory, screamed. The administration backed down and signed the Phase 1 deal. Canada is watching that playbook very carefully. Canadian retaliation in 2025 specifically targeted American beer, wine, and consumer goods products from politically sensitive American states. That's not random, that's studied. Think back to the original NAFTA negotiations in 1992 and 1993. Canada was initially reluctant, negotiating from a weaker position. But over 30 years, NAFTA and then USMCA became the backbone of North American economic integration, with Canada arguably benefiting enormously from guaranteed access to the U.S. market. The current moment represents a potential rupture of that 30-year framework, and history tells us that when regional trade frameworks collapse, the resulting realignment takes decades to stabilize and everyone pays a significant economic price. What makes this moment historically unprecedented is the simultaneous convergence of three factors that have never occurred together before. 1. A Supreme Court ruling directly striking down a president's tariff authority mid-negotiation. 2. The smaller party in the negotiation building active alternative alliances in real time. 3. A mandatory treaty review USMCA 2026 forcing a legal renegotiation of the entire relationship at exactly this moment of maximum tension. Historians will write books about this period. The question is, who comes out of it holding more power? Pause for just 1 second. If this breakdown is giving you context you can't find anywhere else, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this content reach people who need to understand what's actually happening here. Okay, let's talk implications, because this is where it gets really serious. What does all of this really mean? Let's go layer by layer. For Trump, the Supreme Court ruling is a serious political problem wrapped inside a legal problem. His entire second-term economic narrative was built on the idea that tariffs equal strength equal American wins. A Supreme Court of largely conservative justices declaring those tariffs unlawful doesn't just undermine the policy, it undermines the brand. For Carney, this is political oxygen. He came into office with a mandate to redefine Canada's relationship with the United States. Every development this week, the court ruling, the Japan deal, the USMCA meetings validates that mandate. His political position domestically has arguably never been stronger for Mexico, who faces many of the same tariff issues. Canada's success in the legal arena and the diplomatic arena provides a template. Watch for Mexico to be more aggressive in the upcoming March 16th bilateral talks. Now let's talk legal consequences. The $175 billion refund liability is real and it is enormous. The U.S. Customs Agency is under court order to build a refund processing system within 45 days. Companies that paid tariffs under IEEPA, and there are thousands of them, now have a legal pathway to recovery. But lawyers are warning this process will be complicated, slow, and contested. The Trump administration is unlikely to simply write checks. Expect litigation, expect delays, expect political battles over how, when, and whether those refunds get processed. And critically, if the new tariffs being imposed under different legal authorities are also struck down, as lawyers are now predicting, the liability doesn't stop at $175 billion, it grows. Now the economic impact: Canadian exports to the U.S. were already down 6% in 2025 from C$590 billion to C$556 billion. That's real economic damage. Jobs lost, businesses closed, supply chains disrupted. But here's the counterintuitive thing: that damage may have accelerated Canada's diversification in ways that, in the long run, actually benefit the Canadian economy. A country that trades with the entire Indo-Pacific as well as the United States is more resilient than one that is 75% dependent on a single buyer. For the U.S. economy, the picture is more complicated. American companies that exported to Canada paid retaliatory tariffs. American consumers paid higher prices on imported Canadian goods. And now, with $175 billion in potential refunds owed to businesses, there's a real fiscal question about where that money comes from. Now, the constitutional stakes, and this may be the most important long-term implication. The Supreme Court has now drawn a line around executive trade authority. The IEEPA cannot be used to impose blanket country-specific tariffs. That's a constitutional principle that outlasts Trump, outlasts Carney, and shapes the boundaries of American presidential power for decades. It's a win for the rule of law. It's a defeat for the unilateral executive theory of trade, and it sets a precedent that will be cited in every future trade dispute. And finally, international ramifications. The Canada-Japan Comprehensive Strategic Partnership is part of a broader story. Canada signed agreements on this trip not just with Japan, but also held discussions with India and Australia, the other members of the Quad Security Framework. Canada is aligning itself with the democratic Indo-Pacific architecture. This matters enormously for global trade patterns. If Canada successfully positions itself as a reliable, rule-of-law governed supplier of energy, technology, and resources to Asian markets, it reduces American leverage not just in the bilateral sense, but in the broader geopolitical sense. The New York Times called it plainly. Defense without U.S. help is a live topic. That sentence would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. So here's what happens next, and I want to be clear. I'm going to give you scenarios based on the evidence we have, not wishful thinking. Week of March 16, 2026. U.S.-Mexico bilateral discussions on USMCA begin. Watch the language that comes out of these talks very carefully. If Mexico and the U.S. reach a preliminary framework, Canada's negotiating position either strengthens or weakens depending on the terms within 45 days from now. The U.S. Customs refund processing system should be operational. Whether companies actually receive refunds on that timeline is a different question entirely, but this is the first concrete legal milestone. Ongoing through 2026, new legal challenges to Trump's post-IEEPA tariff mechanisms will work their way through courts. If they succeed, the tariff liability and the policy chaos get significantly worse. The 2026 USMCA review outcome is the biggest long-term event. The agreement can be extended, renegotiated, or effectively killed. Every analyst puts the probability of full agreement extension at moderate, but the terms of any extension are now completely different from what they were 18 months ago. Best case scenario for Canada, USMCA gets extended with revised terms that remove the IEEPA tariff authority as a valid mechanism. Canada successfully diversifies 10 to 15% of its trade to Indo-Pacific partners over the next 3 years. The refund process proceeds within 12 months. The constitutional precedent holds. In this scenario, Canada emerges from the trade war stronger, more diversified, and with enhanced international standing. Worst-case scenario, Trump finds a new legal authority to reimpose tariffs possibly under Section 232 national security provisions. USMCA negotiations collapse or drag on for years. Canada's Asian deals fail to scale quickly enough to offset us market losses. Recession in both countries. In this scenario, everybody loses. But Canada loses more in the short term because of its higher export dependency. Most likely scenario, a messy, protracted negotiation that results in a modified USMCA extension, some tariff reduction but not elimination, slow and contested refund processing, and a permanently changed Canada-US relationship that is more transactional and less sentimental. The stakes couldn't be higher because we are not just watching a trade dispute. We are watching the reordering of North America's economic and geopolitical architecture, and the decisions made in the next 90 days will shape the continent for the next 30 years. Let's bring this home. Here's what we know for certain today. March 7, 2026. 1. The U.S. Supreme Court has declared Trump's IEEPA tariffs on Canada illegal with $175 billion in potential refunds now on the table. 2. Canada's PM Mark Carney just signed a historic comprehensive strategic partnership with Japan, explicitly described as giving Canada leverage against the might of the United States. 3. Canada's trade minister was in Washington on March 6 for USMCA negotiations, holding cards that didn't exist 12 months ago. 4. The USMCA formal review process begins the week of March 16th, and the outcome will reshape over $1 trillion in annual trade. This story is absolutely far from over. In fact, we are at the very beginning of its most consequential chapter. Subscribe to this channel right now so you don't miss the next major development. Because things are moving fast and the next 30 days could be decisive. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Canada has genuinely shifted the power balance? Or does the United States, regardless of legal setbacks, still hold the ultimate economic card? I want to know. Until next time, stay informed, stay critical, and stay vigilant. The world is being remade right now, and you deserve to understand exactly how.